All right. So, Phil, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast.
Hey, Stefan. Thank you very much for having me.
No problem. So, let's get started like I'm starting every one of these episodes. And if you wouldn't mind telling me a bit about your Bitcoin origin story. So, how did you originally discover Bitcoin?
I was really lucky in that I think I had the right background, right educational background, and then my early career was the right career where when I discovered Bitcoin, at an event, it was a presentation that somebody gave and it just had enough of the puzzle pieces that it all just kind of made sense and I got interested in it. So my educational background was in economics, studied economics in undergrad, but it was Keynesian economics, and so didn't make a
Yeah.
lot of sense to me. Um, and then after I left the university, I got into healthcare software in the US. So I had a little bit of that economics background, a little bit of the technical background, and then just happened to be in the right place at the right time in 2014 at an event where a woman was presenting about the history of money. I'd always been pretty interested in money in general and how it works, why we choose to, trade our valuable time and energy and efforts to get this token or this piece of paper, right? It didn't really make that much sense to me. But after hearing this presentation, which stereotypically started with the Isle of Yap, I remember that well,
Yeah.
and walked all the way through the new innovation of Bitcoin. That plus my little slightly technical background and my economics background, it really just hooked me on the spot.
Mhm.
So I immediately left the event and soon after purchased my first small amount of Bitcoin. And then I got overly cute with it. And I was like, what's the other cryptocurrency that is the anti Bitcoin? At the time, there wasn't things like Ethereum or anything. So ended up purchasing a small amount of Ripple back in the day. So they affinity scammed me early on,
Yeah.
but it died immediately afterwards. So Bitcoin crashed 70% or something like that. Ripple was dead for 3 years. And then it, somehow revived in 2017. I was able to convert it to Bitcoin. Throughout that time, I was living internationally, and there's a lot of rules about, if you're an American and you have a foreign bank account, you can't have a certain amount beyond, I don't remember the exact amount, but if you have, too many dollars or euros internationally, you have to start filling out additional tax forms. So I was
Mhm.
using that time to just, before I hit that limit, I would just put more dollars into Bitcoin. Ended up being a very good long-term saving strategy. When 2017 rolled around, I had enough of a savings that I felt confident that I could pivot my career from healthcare software into Bitcoin full time. So for the next year and a half or so, I was freelancing, writing content, volunteering, working with a few smaller startups, just contributing my skills, and then found Unchained in
Mhm.
2019, and the rest is history.
Cool. Thanks for that background. And so obviously you've had quite the journey with Bitcoin, and you obviously stumbled upon it pretty early as well. Was it kind of happen chance by luck that you got into this presentation, the history of money? Was it something that how did you initially what drew you to this event?
I was living at the time in Madison, Wisconsin, and Madison has a lot of great kind of evening events. It has a ton of bars, and this event was just this really kind of silly bar event called Nerd Night, where a lot of local, students and entrepreneurs would go up and do 10 or 15-minute pitches or educational presentations on any topic. And Bitcoin just happened to be one of the topics. So, I was with my girlfriend at the time, and we were like, oh, let's go to this event. Sounds fun. And yeah, just happened to get orange pilled at the event. I don't know if, there might have been some other folks in that room that also found the presentation interesting enough to look into Bitcoin, but I haven't met anyone else who was at that presentation who then got into Bitcoin. Although I did later on find the woman who was giving the presentation, got brunch with her, bought her brunch, and said, "Hey, I don't know if you remember this, but like you changed my life at this presentation." So it was kind of fun to reconnect with her. I wasn't, creepy about it or anything. I looked her up on
Oh, yeah.
like LinkedIn, messaged her and said, "Hey, this is very random, but you gave a presentation in 2014. You want to get coffee?" And she
Yeah.
agreed.
That's awesome. And it's to me, it's really cool how kind of a random occurrence like that, let's say, where you kind of stumble upon an event. It's not like you were specifically going there to learn about Bitcoin, right? It just so happened that it was an event that you were going to, and then, like you said, it ended up changing your life. But to me, what's interesting is because I think, especially at the time when you learned about it, Bitcoin wasn't nearly what it was today, right? So I think it could have been easy to initially hear that presentation and maybe shrug it off and say, okay, well, yeah, sounds good in theory, but it's still very new, very nascent. Who knows what this is going to be. So what for you was maybe that like mental switch where or something during the presentation? I guess what was the value proposition that you originally heard which made you really think like, oh wow, this has the potential to be what it is today and what it can still become even more in the future?
I don't think that was necessarily the first time that I had heard about Bitcoin. I think I had probably read articles about Bitcoin being used in Silk Road. And I remember
Mm.
really early on when I was in college, like learning or hearing something about Bitcoin, but then just thinking, this doesn't sound real to me, or I didn't quite understand it because it sounded like video game currency, but
Mm.
without the game. And I wasn't knowledgeable enough, or I didn't have the right components of the story at, early on to get interested in it. What I think the presentation did for me was really ground Bitcoin in monetary history. And that's why
Mm.
there's a joke where if you ask a Bitcoiner why Bitcoin is valuable, they always bring up the Isle of Yap, which is, this Polynesian island with large stone rocks that they used as money. So it's a bit of a joke, but it's really important, I think, to provide the right context for somebody
Mm.
to grasp Bitcoin.
Mm.
A lot of people just live their lives never questioning why the dollar or the euro or any other form of money came to be. And for me, it was just a nagging question my whole life because it did seem in a lot of ways very arbitrary.
Mhm.
Like, why are we spending all day every day to earn this little piece of paper? Why do other people accept this piece of paper and give me their time and their output in exchange? So that was just a question, a very basic, fundamental, question that I had that didn't have a great response or answer. And then
Mm.
once I started learning about different forms of money throughout human civilization and how the forms of money were good or bad at being money, and really understanding that money is a tool. It's like a
Yeah.
value communication tool.
Mhm.
And tools, just like a hammer or anything else, you can have tools that are really good at the job
Mhm.
and really bad at the job.
Yeah.
And just studying the history of it, you can find tools that were particularly good, gold. You can find forms of money that were pretty bad. Honestly, the stones, I think,
Mhm.
in Polynesia were not particularly good forms of money. They worked for a very small nation, but wouldn't scale beyond that. And then you start learning, about the dollar or the euro or fiat currency as it exists today. And what many, many people, probably a majority of the world, don't realize is that the way money works today is a minuscule blip on the timeline of human civilization and history and the forms of money that have existed.
Yeah.
Until 1971,
Mhm.
pretty much all money throughout history was based on a commodity that was difficult to inflate, such as gold. maybe
Mm,
silver. Silver is a
mm,
little bit easier to inflate. But even the paper money was always redeemable for those commodities, those physical items. And then in 1971, it just became paper. It's literally paper. And now, actually, not even literally paper. It might even just be ones and zeros on a screen.
mm,
What blew my mind in 2020 was just the speed at which the central banks were able to create trillions of dollars. And if you think about just functionally how that happened, I'm not kidding you. They are at a computer. They open up the account of whatever bank they want to give money to, and then they just type 1 0 0 0 0 0 enter, and then
mm,
everyone in the world has just had their savings debased because the dollar is essentially the global reserve currency, right? We export the U.S. exports inflation, so when the U.S. inflates our currency, all the other currencies are impacted by this. And it's just as trivial as somebody typing 1 0 0 0 enter, and then it causes this massive rippling effect throughout the world.
mm.
I find that to be really immoral and just wrong. It's in a lot of ways barbaric.
Yeah,
So
yeah. No.
that's kind of what drew me to Bitcoin, is that it fixes these problems. And if
Mm,
you study the different properties of money, and there are
mhm,
five of them, five properties that are really the most important: scarce, durable,
mhm,
transmittable,
mhm.
fungible, and
Yeah.
then um, what was the last one? There's another one. I always forget the fifth one.
Sorry, say the ones again. You said fungible.
Durability, scarcity, fungibility, transferability, divisibility.
Yeah.
There we go.
There you go. Good
I can
memory.
remember
Yeah.
four. Never. So yeah. So Bitcoin is really ranks highly on all of those,
Mhm,
and the next best form of money is gold on those
mm,
scales, but it's not as transferable. It's not as divisible.
mm,
It's not as scarce.
mm.
So once you start understanding the properties of money and the framework that you can use to just figure out which is a good money versus a bad money, you can just rank it, and Bitcoin ranks extremely highly.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with everything you just said, and I think you made a lot of good points, but I think the one that I really, associated to as well is like when, I grew up in the American education system as well, and when you think about the education that you get, you don't learn anything about how money works, how it's created, any monetary history, none of that. And so for me, when I initially discovered Bitcoin, I think like a lot of people, you come into it because of the hype. You hear about Bitcoin, oh, what is this? And then as you start to learn more about it and learn more about what the technology is, it's, like we say, it's a Bitcoin rabbit hole. You just kind of keep going down and uncovering different layers of what it is, how it works, and then broader as well in terms of, going to monetary history, how monetary works, all the different economics and social implications that money has for people. And so that's why I sometimes find it difficult almost to really concisely explain the value proposition behind Bitcoin. I mean, we know it's there, but I think because there's so much that unpacks with it and, explaining almost how money works to people is incredibly difficult. And so my question is like, how do you explain to Bitcoiners who are new or people who are entering the space, what why is Bitcoin valuable in today's world? Because I think a lot of us, as well, when you're living in, I mean, we see it now more and more in even the developed world in Europe and the US, that inflation is definitely increasing pretty drastically. But people in maybe some undeveloped countries maybe don't need to hear it as much in terms of what's the value proposition when you're living through hyperinflationary currencies, right? But for people living in the Western world who, for the most part, they haven't seen the dramatic effects of like a hyperinflation or dramatic monetary effect, like how do you explain to them why they should own Bitcoin and what the main like value proposition is?
It's really funny. I used to try to give a very comprehensive answer to that
Mm-hmm.
question. And then I was talking with one of my sisters, and she she brought up the way that she orange pills people, and it's so simple that I'm probably going to start using it, which is when people ask me like why should I learn about Bitcoin? You just say, well, it's the best performing asset in my portfolio.
That's good.
And it just it leverages, this idea that it increases in value over time. And it's just I think, a very straightforward way to communicate. Well, the reason I like Bitcoin is because it's the best performing asset that I own.
Mhm,
Um, Now, if you're interested in learning why it's the best performing asset, that's like that's the rabbit hole, right?
mhm,
But
yeah,
I think, you know, over time, I've just really changed the way that I approach this whole concept of orange pilling someone. I used to give Bitcoin to them. Hey, it's super
mhm,
easy to get set up. Let's download a wallet, install it.
mhm,
That did not work well, I would say, because it was too much like handing out a flyer, being like, hey, I'm with the Church of Satoshi. Please take this flyer. People, would end up losing the money or just not valuing it. So
mhm,
I've completely stopped giving people Bitcoin. I will, of course, help them make their first Bitcoin purchase.
mhm,
So if they are interested in Bitcoin, want to learn more about it, I am more than happy to help them buy their own Bitcoin, because that is them making a decision to put skin in the game,
mhm,
right? Me giving you some money, there's no skin in the game there. I've just given you, again, kind of like a flyer. But even if you're buying $5 worth, $20 worth, you have now made a decision to convert dollars into Bitcoin. And
mhm,
that decision, I think, first of all, creates a lifelong Bitcoin user.
mhm,
That first time you make that purchase, you're now hooked on Bitcoin for life because it is the best form of money. And even if you sell that Bitcoin, you will come back to it. But
mhm,
that first decision to make a small allocation to Bitcoin, I think, is the hardest. And that's the thing that I want
yeah,
to accelerate uh, people on. Now, the cultural ramifications of Bitcoin and the deeper rabbit hole, I'm of course happy to talk to folks about that, but I have just stopped leading with it. I just think it's too. I don't know. It causes people to kind of think maybe this is like a cult or something like that. Or and
mhm,
I also do joke often about the Bitcoin religion or cult. Jokingly, like, I think it's good to be a little self-deprecating about it, like, oh yeah, join the cult, it's fun if people
yeah,
kind of bring it up. But no, I just start now very, very simply. I love Bitcoin because it significantly improved my life, right?
mhm,
And that's, for a lot of people, is all they need to hear. They just need to hear like, hey, it actually has impacted somebody that I know positively. Because what
mhm,
most people read or hear about it is it's for criminals, it's volatile, it's super
mhm,
risky, blah blah blah. No, if they meet somebody in real life who's like, yeah, I just use it to buy my house, I love it. It's like, oh, changes
mhm,
something.
yeah.
So yeah, I'm
And
just trying to
what
keep it
would you
simple.
say? Yeah, no, but I think that's kind of the best way to do it sometimes because I think I started with that as well when people would ask me about, why should I buy Bitcoin? I would also kind of try to have this whole spiel of the value and all that. And, most people I think because it takes time to learn, right? I think, yourself, you probably spend hundreds, if not thousands of hours learning about Bitcoin, learning about the monetary history, the technological, history, all of that. And it's through that time that you really build that conviction and really understand what it is that you're holding and also how the broader world and monetary system works because yeah most people just aren't aware of that. So I like what you're saying, to keep it simple and just allude to maybe some of the simpler sides of Bitcoin and then have them discover the further parts themselves if they're interested. And you also said that Bitcoin has dramatically improved your life, which for me it's the same. But what are some tangible ways in which you would say that Bitcoin has improved your life?
That's a that's a tough question. There's a lot of subtle ways in that, now I'm exceedingly skeptical of propaganda that I read, that's
Yeah.
published from, the news or the government or whatever, because I think it becomes a lot more clear that it isn't truthful, that it is
Mhm.
propaganda to kind of prop up this current system. So I'm definitely more skeptical of the established, central banking and government regime. And I think
Mhm.
that Bitcoin will really bring a lot of truth and reason to this system that we have, which can exist without truth and reason because they just have the
Yeah.
ability to take everyone's savings.
Mhm.
So that's kind of a cultural way that it's impacted my life. I
Mhm.
mean, more um, just simply, it's allowed me to purchase my first home, to get a car, just get basic things that, everyone,
Mhm.
not everyone, but many people are struggling to get into their first home. They're struggling
Mhm.
to make different payments, and just having saved in Bitcoin for a long time, it really changes your ability to, um, exist in the world and be prosperous. I mean, the value, the price of homes on a Bitcoin standard have crashed 95% over the last,
Mhm.
5 years or whatever. Cost of groceries, they're down 90% if you use Bitcoin as your form of money.
Mhm.
Education, energy, transportation, all of these things are getting significantly cheaper if Bitcoin is your money. Now, if you're thinking in dollar terms and you focus on the dollar, and the dollar is your primary form of savings, and everything that you invest in is kind of tied to the dollar, things are getting much tougher out there. They're getting
Mhm.
much more expensive simply because 12 people in a room decided to print 50% of all the dollars that have ever been created over the course of like 3 years without asking permission. The entire reason that everything is getting worse off in the economy is
Mhm.
because somebody sat down at a computer and typed 10000 and then hit enter. It's crazy. So, anyways, culturally, it's changed me. And then also just financially, it makes living easier. Now, the hardest part of living on a Bitcoin standard is getting to the point where you're like, okay, I know I need to actually spend some of this Bitcoin. The Gresham's law is like a really intense reality to deal with. And Gresham's law, for
Mhm.
those who don't know, is essentially if I have two forms of money, one is a stronger form and one is a weaker form, I'm going to get rid of the weaker form of money first,
Mhm.
right? So if you're holding US dollars or Venezuelan bolivars and the shops around you accept both of them, you're going to spend your bolivars first.
Mhm.
Get rid of that trash, right? The exact same thing is happening if you save in Bitcoin and the dollar is being accepted elsewhere. I will do everything in my power to get rid of my dollars to hold on to my Bitcoin. But at some point, you've been saving long enough and kept your money secure, you have to start using your Bitcoin. So getting over that mental block of like, oh, this could be worth a lot more in the future
Mhm.
is tough. But, at the end of the day, your time on Earth is more scarce than Bitcoin.
Mhm.
And so you don't want to live as like a, you know, you don't want to live too far below your means just so that you can hold on to
Yeah.
Bitcoin for longer. But my plan is to pass most of my Bitcoin down to the future generations.
Mhm. Yeah, very well said. And I agree with that a lot because it is a struggle as a Bitcoiner, because you are living on this like dual monetary standard. I mean, you're on a Bitcoin standard, but you're still interacting in a fiat world, right? Where, everything that you buy nowadays is priced in fiat for the most part. And, like you said, it's you also want to get rid of the fiat before you would get rid of the Bitcoin. But something that I guess I also struggle with is because Bitcoin is so volatile. It's a great thing to be able to save in and hold for the long term. That's what I tell my friends. I'm like, if you're trying to trade this within the next 6 months or a year or whatever, like, good luck with that. But that's not what I do, I always tell them, buy it and hold it for, the future. And it's a bit of a, two-sided coin because the volatility, it does have real impacts. And I know that a lot of Bitcoiners also, you know, there are a lot of Bitcoiners who are fully on a Bitcoin standard and actually live only on Bitcoin, which also makes it difficult if at the moment where we're living through now, where Bitcoin is so volatile, it does make it difficult to spend definitely on a daily basis. So how do you balance, I guess, that, right? How do you balance living on a Bitcoin standard while still living in a fiat world, if that makes sense?
I think it's a personal decision that everyone is going to make. And I don't know when it exactly happened for me, but I realized at one point, you know, throughout my Bitcoin journey, I was still very much into Bitcoin, but I was still thinking in the US dollar. I
Mm,
was like, how many dollars is this worth? And what really switched for me was when I started thinking in Bitcoin. How much
mm,
Bitcoin do I have? How much Bitcoin does this house cost? How much Bitcoin do these groceries cost? Stuff like that. There's nobody that's going to come out and be like, you now have to price everything in Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't have a central authority to dictate
mhm,
something like that. It's always an individual choice that you'll have to come to and you'll have to make.
mm,
So you can start doing that and you can start pricing your life in Bitcoin. It's definitely easier to start with larger items
mhm.
rather than the smaller bottles of water, for example. But I think that's just how it starts. It's just when I do need to make a larger purchase, I always ask the vendor, "Hey, would you prefer?" So I always tell them, I'm like, "I'm making this purchase with Bitcoin. Would you like to receive the Bitcoin directly, or would you like me to convert it to dollars for you?" And they're like, "Huh, that's weird." But I always lead with, "I'm buying this thing with Bitcoin. How would you like to receive your Bitcoin, in dollars or as Bitcoin?"
Yeah, that's good.
Um, yeah, so it just kind of turns things on its head a little bit because they're probably not even thinking about it. But what I hope is that they look at the price of Bitcoin and then 2 months later they go, "Oh,
Mhm.
why didn't I take the Bitcoin?"
Yeah.
um, so yeah, I mean, I just think the change starts with each individual. And one really important thing, I mean, it just depends on your life situation. Everyone's life situation is very different. And, I'm not a financial advisor or anything, so I can't
Yeah.
advise you individually how to do things. But just make sure, Bitcoin is extremely volatile. I don't think
Mhm,
that that means that Bitcoin is risky. I think it's extremely safe and
mhm,
not risky at all if you understand the volatility, if you
mhm,
understand how to safely custody it. Those are some big ifs. But
mhm,
once you get past those, it's really low risk to save in Bitcoin. You just put it into something like a multi-sig address, you
mhm,
wait for 5 years, and then when you want to spend it, you use your keys.
mhm,
The dollar is actually, in my view, seriously risky because at any point in time, people can debase it, the system can collapse. They really try to suppress all of the volatility. And the free market doesn't really like when there's like an external force that's just trying to like artificially suppress
yeah,
how the world works. And it just blows up. Every 10 years, roughly, there's a massive financial crisis has happened pretty much on the 10-year mark, 10 to 12-year mark since
mm,
1971. And that just doesn't necessarily happen in Bitcoin. Like, yeah, Bitcoin has 4-year rough cycles. So far, each cycle has been roughly an order of magnitude higher value, right? So it went up to $200 and then crashed to $10, and then it went up to
mm,
$1,000 and crashed to $200. Then it went up to 20,000 and crashed to 2,000. Like, yes, it crashes and it spikes, but if you understand how it evolves and the trajectory and how people are actually using it, so you can just view, since it's public data, you can view the blockchain and just see, hey, a majority of people are saving their Bitcoin. They're not spending it right
Mm,
now. It can give you the tools you need to be able to weather the volatility. So Bitcoin is super volatile. It's going to change in price on any given day until it becomes totally ubiquitous.
mm,
That's the asymmetry that you have.
yeah.
So if you can stomach the volatility and you understand, how to custody it correctly, don't put it at, what was the exchange that just got hacked for $300 million today? BMM Bitcoin. Don't put your Bitcoin in with exchanges. Take self custody, learn how to use multi-sig, treat it with respect. Like it's worth it. You just have to invest some of your time to learn a new skill, but it's not a skill that is particularly difficult. It's just
Mhm.
new. Um,
Yeah.
I don't even think self custody Bitcoin is more difficult than driving a car. I think driving a
Mhm.
car is actually pretty difficult. You just get used to it. If
Mhm.
you remember learning how to drive a car, at least for me, I thought it was very complicated, but now
Yeah.
it's like second nature. Same thing happens with Bitcoin and keys. So yeah, I don't even know where we started on this topic, but
No, no, no. It was
but
a great tangent. But I think, you also mentioned a good point, which because now we're living, it's 2024. We just had another halving happen. And typically, if you look historically, the halvings also align with bull runs in the Bitcoin markets. And so I do see, more adoption, not just because of the bull run, but also I think, everything that's going on around it. But to me, there's still quite a few hindrances, let's say, to adoption. One of them is education, people not really understanding what it is, what the value is, and why they should hold it. And another part of it is something that I'm also passionate about, and I know that you're passionate about, is the custodying of Bitcoin, right? Because Bitcoin is a bearer asset, and that's something that I think to a lot of people is pretty foreign because most of the time now, right, we don't actually hold the money that we own. A bank holds it, and there's fractional reserve banking and all of that good stuff. And Bitcoin is this asset which you can actually hold yourself and custody yourself. And so, can you explain to my listeners a bit? Because I think personally, the multi sig collaborative custody model is right now the best and most accessible model to scale, self custody of Bitcoin. But for a lot of people, they have probably no idea what it is. So, could you
Mhm.
explain a bit, what multi sig collaborative custody is and the work that specifically, you're also doing at Unchained Capital?
I might actually start with just Bitcoin in general. So all Bitcoin, I think there's 19.7 million of them, I think, out there right now, something like that. All Bitcoin are stored in addresses that are tracked by the blockchain, so the
Mhm.
database, right? So all Bitcoin live in addresses. All Bitcoin addresses, all of them, are controlled by keys. So you can think of a Bitcoin address as like a treasure chest or a safety deposit box. Now you can have Bitcoin addresses that you can unlock with one key, or you can have Bitcoin addresses that you can unlock with multiple keys. It's called
Mhm.
multi-sig. But it's essentially just how you're building your Bitcoin safe, right? Your vault,
Mhm.
your safety deposit box, your treasure chest. A lot of the stories that we've read about hacks and people losing keys and so on and losing millions of dollars of Bitcoin in a landfill kind of boil down to two things. A critical single point of failure. So if one thing goes wrong, the Bitcoin's gone. That usually happens with exchanges. So just like I mentioned previously, that exchange that just got hacked, the company itself was your critical point of failure there. If something happened to that company, money's all gone. It also happens in self custody when you typically when you've built a Bitcoin address with one key, single signature address is what that's called. If you
Mhm.
lose the one key to your address, you've lost the Bitcoin. So the stories you've read in the New York Times and over the years of people losing Bitcoin, most of the time, maybe all of those cases, it's with Bitcoin addresses that are controlled by one key and they just didn't protect that key well enough or didn't realize what they were protecting and lost the key. What's nice about multi-sig, so again, Bitcoin addresses that you need multiple keys to unlock,
Mhm.
is that you can set it up so that you can lose multiple pieces of information and still get access to the Bitcoin. So at Unchained, we help clients build these Bitcoin addresses controlled by multiple keys. Unchained holds one key, and then our clients can hold two keys. And then two keys are needed to unlock the Bitcoin and spend it. So clients have full control over the Bitcoin, but at the same time, Unchained is there as a partner. And in the event that they lose one of the keys, not a problem. Unchained can step in and sign transactions and help to recover. Now, that's how we custody the Bitcoin at Unchained. And we currently work with over 8,000 clients custodying over 93,000 Bitcoin. So this model is becoming significantly larger and
Mhm.
it's extremely secure. The reason it's becoming larger is because Bitcoin is flocking to the most secure form of custody over time. But we start with that form of custody. And then on top of that, we've built a financial services company. So we can help clients with trading
Mhm.
in and out of Bitcoin, with retirement accounts, because again, Bitcoin is a really extremely potent tool for long-term savings.
Mhm.
And then even for folks who might have a lot of Bitcoin today, we have Bitcoin collateralized loans. So you can use your Bitcoin as collateral for a US dollar loan and not have to sell your Bitcoin today. Even in the event of a loan, we're still using those multi-signature addresses. But in the event of the loan, Unchained holds a key, another company holds a second key, and a client holds a third key. So you can't have full control over the Bitcoin when you're using it as collateral for a loan, but it's still living in that special address where no single party has
Mhm.
control of the Bitcoin and can lose it. So this form of custody is really what differentiates Unchained from other custodians. We're not even a custodian. We're a collaborative custody partner or a key agent. We
Mhm.
help you to secure your multi-sig Bitcoin, but we cannot at any time lose your Bitcoin because we don't have full control of it.
Yeah. That's a great description of how it works because it is a complicated topic, I think, especially for, beginners getting into the space. And as it relates to, overall custody of Bitcoin and just the larger Bitcoin ecosystem, where do you see the future of that space going? So I think personally that multi-sig collaborative custody is going to play, a large role in that. But how do you see it scaling also to, millions, if not billions of people who also want to use Bitcoin to transact and to, purchase daily things or a house or things like that? Because multi-sig collaborative custody is a great model, but I also see it as like a deep storage, the vault that you have at home. Whereas you're not going to every day, if you want to go buy groceries, go to your vault and get out your money. So just in general, how do you see that space as it relates to custodying and Bitcoin scale in a way that's sustainable, where you don't also now have, fractional reserve Bitcoin and all of this stuff that we have in the current system?
What's amazing about multisig is that it is really the foundation. It, like the fact that you can program a Bitcoin address is the foundation for all kinds of additional ways to store Bitcoin.
Hmm.
So just like with fiat currency, you might have a checking account and a savings account, and your checking account is for daily expenses, and your savings account is maybe a little bit harder to access. You might get a different interest rate. In Bitcoin, there's a similar concept, right? So a multi-signature vault with Unchained, just to your point, is the best place for your long term savings, right? You don't want to be using your vault every day because it has multiple keys to get out, and all it's all on the base layer of Bitcoin, and so transaction fees are going to be higher. It's
Hmm.
great for security, not so great for the daily transactions. There's things like Lightning wallets, which, funny enough, are actually built on multi-sig, right? A
Hmm.
Lightning wallet is two different parties that come together and agree to put Bitcoin up, and then you can transact in between those parties and hop to different parties over this network, the Lightning network. So you can do millions of transactions per second for extremely low costs, but at the bottom level of that is just multi-sig. So Lightning wallets, I think, are great for day-to-day transactions today. I think Lightning itself is actually starting to hit some scaling issues with the base layer. And so now there's new solutions that are being proposed that are coming out. Fediments,
Mhm.
kind of this whole eCash idea. Even Fediments are built on top of Bitcoin multisig. It's a party of
Mhm.
people holding keys. They contribute Bitcoin to this little pool, and then you can move it's actually not Bitcoin at that point, but you can move the tokens from within the pool and then send them over Lightning Network to other pools. So there's a lot of really fascinating ways that Bitcoin is scaling, and I think they're ways that you wouldn't I don't think they could possibly be planned, right? They're
Mhm.
organically emerging from people tinkering and experimenting. And then there's a bunch of different components that are just kind of naturally coming together to form this scaling solution that, again, no single person or even a small group of people could possibly have predicted years ago.
Mhm.
So I might just leave it at that. I don't think there's a way for us to predict exactly how Bitcoin is going to scale to billions of people, but it is happening. And when I think about something like collaborative custody, the way that Unchained does it today is typically where client holds two keys and Unchained holds a key. But there's also a world where the client themselves maybe doesn't directly hold a private key to layer one, but they've hired Unchained to hold a key. They've hired another institutional key agent to hold a key, and maybe they hold one key, or they could even hire, three different companies to help them secure their
Mhm.
Bitcoin, and no one of those companies by themselves could lose Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I think that's how a lot of these institutional custody solutions are going to evolve. I don't think that it is sustainable, for example, for what is it, 10 out of 11 of the current ETFs to use a single custodian.
Yeah.
They're all with essentially Coinbase.
Mm.
That is not sustainable. Bitcoin really, really rejects centralization efforts.
Mhm.
And when Bitcoin centralizes, when it pools together into a large area, it can be extremely risky. So I think just to survive and just to differentiate themselves, I think that these ETFs and other major institutional products need to find a better custody solution.
Mhm.
Now, I'm a little biased here, but I believe that multi-sig is the best solution for stuff like that. Like, so that no single company
Mhm.
could possibly lose the Bitcoin.
Yeah, agreed. I think multi-sig is a solution for a lot of Bitcoin custody in general. And I think, you also touched on some interesting points with regards to, I think the overall Bitcoin ecosystem right now is, like the internet in the 90s, where you're saying, you can't really predict a lot of what's going to happen because, in the 90s, if you had told someone about, social media and Instagram and all this content and creator economy and all this stuff, and even what we're doing right now, having a digital interview or podcast, I think a lot of people wouldn't have believed you, and I think that's really exciting because it's a really exciting time to come into Bitcoin and to also try to contribute to that, right? Because I think there is a lot of opportunity to create good solutions that are also aligned with the ethos in Bitcoin, for what you guys are doing at Unchained, where it is, this model of you have someone who is there to help you and a trusted third party, but you are still in control and you have full responsibility over yourself and your funds. And so if you look towards the next, few years, let's say the medium to short term, 3 to 5 years, where do you see, not in terms of price, but just maybe in terms of adoption and the overall, ecosystem, where do you see Bitcoin going?
I was just talking about this with some coworkers yesterday. So the Unchained office, we're always bantering about, stuff like this. But I think the thing that really surprised me was that presidential candidates this time around are using Bitcoin and crypto more broadly as a political platform. So
Mm.
Bitcoin has gotten large enough that it is now a major issue in at least the United States. I think probably a major issue globally. I know that there are other presidential candidates around the world that are using Bitcoin as part of their platform. Definitely after the success of El Salvador and kind of this free market money idea that is permeating around the world.
Mm.
So I think this is the first election in the US at least where Bitcoin is going to be, we'll see if it's a polarizing issue, if it's like left versus right. It's actually right now starting to look like, so Donald Trump says, I'm the pro crypto candidate. The Democrats, I think, have been historically pretty antagonistic to Bitcoin and
Mm.
crypto, but it does seem like they're cooling right now. I know the Biden administration recently started reaching out to different crypto companies. And I love this. I love that both sides are recognizing that this issue is large enough that they need to take some position on it.
Mm.
And if they're antagonistic, we'll see what happens. If both sides end up being open to it, I think that's a great outcome, because it is my perspective that Bitcoin is not political. Money is not political.
Mhm.
Money is just the tool that everyone needs to use to communicate and collaborate around the world, right? Hammers aren't political. Uh, so I think this is the election where it is a major issue about, okay, are we pro? Are we against? 4 years from now, I think the political issues are going to be, hey, which Bitcoin improvement proposal does this candidate agree with versus that candidate?
Yeah.
And it sounds a little crazy right now, but I think that's how quickly things are going to move.
Mm.
With the kind of financial tools that have just been released this year, it's like year one for real institutional adoption, and we're already seeing the public companies that are taking a step towards incorporating Bitcoin as part of their treasury strategy. They're
Mm.
seeing massive gains in their stock prices, right? MicroStrategy is one of the best performing stocks of the last 4 years, simply because they added a Bitcoin strategy. So that trend is going to continue. And at some point, it'll just be so obvious that you can't ignore it anymore. And that's kind of where we're at right now. I think there's some people who are just kind of head in the sand about it. But, I think it was Bitstein who said Bitcoin is the only game where the losing move is not to play, something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, or it's the game where a winning move is just to play the game. So it's really interesting, very fascinating, and I think it'll happen much quicker than we anticipate. I think we're kind of on the precipice with this year and the political climate and the regulatory climate. So we'll see.
Mm. Very exciting times. I agree. I think it's a really interesting time to be in Bitcoin. I mean, it always is, but specifically now, with the halving and the election coming up and all the ETFs and everything, it's an exciting time. And so my final question for you is, to people entering the space, we're probably going to have a lot of new people entering the space for the first time. What would your advice be to them?
Stay away from shitcoins. Just buy Bitcoin and think about it as a long-term savings strategy. Don't think about it as you're going to get rich quick, because that's how you get wrecked on
Mm.
crypto and Bitcoin and all these things, like chasing the next best thing. There is no
Mm.
next best thing. Bitcoin is the only one with a credible monetary property. It is the only one with a remote chance of becoming a global reserve currency. That gets more likely every single day that Bitcoin survives,
Mm.
because of its monetary properties, because it has a fixed supply of 21 million that can't be changed. So avoid the cryptos. Those are all just kind of marketing schemes to try to take your money. It doesn't cost anything, or it costs extremely little for somebody to create a new cryptocurrency. It requires tons of real world energy and infrastructure to produce Bitcoin, to mine Bitcoin. So there's real proof of work is what it's called in creating Bitcoin. That's real money. It's hard to produce. Can't debase it. All these cryptos are shiny marketing trinkets. So I think maybe that's my first piece of advice is understand that Bitcoin is different than broader crypto. I find crypto to be way closer, nearly identical to the current system. It's like
Mhm.
essentially central bankers turned up to 11 because, a guy in a basement can now be a central banker. Bitcoin is very different from that, although on the surface it looks the same. So yeah, start slow, avoid the shit coins, think about Bitcoin for many years and don't plan to sell it. And learn about, you don't have to dive right into self custody. Don't feel like, you have to wait to get any Bitcoin before you learn how to secure it. Just start with an exchange or a custodian and buy a small amount, get a sense for how it moves and how it's different. And then as that amount gets larger and it becomes more important to you, that's when you want to start learning about self custody. Now, self custody, I think self custody, just the word sounds scary. It's really not
Mm,
scary. Like, if you can secure the keys to your house and to your car and to your, I don't know, your bank safety deposit box, you can secure the keys to your Bitcoin,
yeah,
right? You just have to understand that they are keys and you need to understand how the keys interact with your Bitcoin addresses. You can do it. It's pretty simple. I like to make the joke that if you can write down a grocery list and not lose the grocery list, you can control the keys to Bitcoin because it's
yeah,
very similar.
I like that. Great advice. Awesome, Phil. Well, thank you so much for your time. Where can my listeners find you, learn more about the work that it is that you're doing, and yeah, the broader work at Unchained as well?
Yeah, Stefan, thanks so much for having me. You can find me on Twitter at Phil_Geiger. And then, my email is phil@unchained.com. You can find Unchained at unchained.com. Would definitely recommend taking a look if you're new to Bitcoin at some of Unchained's blog resources. We have a really great blog that covers, the economics of Bitcoin, the technical side of Bitcoin, how to secure it. Really comprehensive place to start your journey. So yeah, check out unchained.com and definitely reach out to us if you're interested in learning more about Bitcoin or making like a larger initial allocation. We'd be happy to walk you through the entire process from A to Z.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, I'll put all of that in the show notes as well. And Phil, thanks again so much for your time. I found it super insightful, and I'm sure that my listeners will as well.
Thanks.